Welcome to the Diary of Discovery, the podcast where we delve deep into the human experience of healing and transformation. I'm your host, Jackie Clark, and each week we will sit down with inspiring individuals who have embarked on their own personal journeys of healing and self-discovery. From overcoming trauma to navigating life's challenges, our guests share their raw and honest stories, offering insights, wisdom, and hope to all who tune in. So grab your favorite cup of tea, find a cozy spot, and join us as we uncover the power of resilience, courage, and the pursuit of authenticity. This is the Diary of Discovery. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am super excited to be back with our next guest. So, do you want to tell everyone who you are and where you are in the world?
Absolutely. My name is Dina Ely, and I am in northwestern suburb of New York City. So I have the city close enough for when I feel like putting myself through that. And then I have the beauty of nature around me, which is really kind of my element. So best of both worlds. And I've been here most of my life, except for when I went to college in Vermont, which was also quite beautiful. And apart from traveling the world, this is really just home for me. And my son, who's 13 and never lets me forget it. And I am a wellness guide. I have a modality that I developed for recovery from my own trauma, or through recovery from my own trauma, that is actually just to guide sort of holistic wellness in general through nature and natural principles, because going outside and being in nature, as we'll talk about, is a big part of how I help myself heal. But I also have a career as an ethical marketing consultant where I'm trying to bring trauma-informed principles into advertising and communications. So that's me.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Wow, wow, wow. I love both of those things so much. They're both so needed in the world. And I'm very excited to get into this conversation. So, we always start with the same question, and that is, where did you start your healing journey? So, what got you to the point of needing to heal, and what was the breaking point for you that you knew something had to change?
Sure. Well, what began for me was very early on in childhood. So I'm sure that's something that a lot of trauma, people who have gone through trauma, particularly early in life, know what that does and the patterns of complex trauma in childhood. And really didn't process it or wasn't even really aware, I think, that something was not right. In my life on a number of levels. I had a father who was severely alcoholic and had a number of psychotic breaks during my childhood that involved me in different ways. And I had just some other incidences, things that I won't talk about out of respect of family and people listening, because I know a common thread for a lot of us. And really, when I was a kid, I didn't realize that what I was doing when I was spending as much time outside in nature as I did, trying to escape and looking for the sense of magic that I believed was out there. You know, I was like peeking around mole holes for leprechauns and like just trying to find other worlds out there that I felt really existed in the energy of nature. Was really escaping to a place that was safer, that was a natural home, and that was, I hate to sound disrespectful of my family, because it's not that I was unsafe, but when things happen to you and dysregulate you from a young age, you don't really know what safety looks or feels like. So I was unaware at that point that really I was in need of any kind of healing. My father did pass away when I was 8. So that was probably the first time that people had started looking at me like I'd been through trauma, because they assume that a child who has that happen, not incorrectly, is traumatized in some way. And I think it was more the attention of that and like the fruit baskets and the priests coming to the house and stuff that was almost more of an event than the passing itself, which took a long time for me to process. I don't think I cried about it till I was 13. And so that's a big gap, but it was also just like, okay, well, they put me into counseling in school without even telling my mom. And it's like they make such a thing of trying to control the processing of the grief, that the grief is just the last thing you're thinking about, you know? So that was probably another event down the cascade. And then in my early 20s is really when I had that moment where I was like, okay, something has to be addressed here. And I think that what happened with me was my grandfather became a really safe person in my life. My maternal grandfather, he lived really close, and he took over a lot of things that my father, you know, little rituals that we had. I was blessed then to have a stepfather who was really wonderful, and the support of my mom as well. But when my grandfather died I was in, I think, 24, it was just like the world stopped. That was kind of like the hardest thing, especially because, and this is where a little trigger warning might be good for your audience, especially because he was a Marine through and through. You know, they say you never really stop being a Marine, and he really believed that. So he was always the protector, fiercely protective of especially my mom and my sister and I. And when he died, he had a stroke and fell and hit his head. And so he was in ICU for quite a long time. Um, he was kind of in and out of consciousness before he became comatose. And the nurse at one point asked him, when they do the mini mental check, do you know where you are? And, you know, he said, the hospital. And they said, why are you here? And he looked at my mom and he said, protecting the girls. And here's this guy in this, you know, 80-year-old guy in an ICU bed, and just believing that that was why he was there and truly was his purpose. So when the time came for us to make the decision to take him off of life support, it was extremely hard for me. It was the feeling of giving up on someone who never would have given up on me. Even though I know logically, and I knew then, it was the kindest and reasonable decision, you still really have to face a lot when that decision is presented to your family and the family says, okay, we're only going to do this if we're all in agreement. It's like, okay, well, that's a lot. So that was the moment. I think after that I actually had um, episodes of PTSD. I had to put a cat down, and instantly I was back in that hospital room. And suddenly I would come out of this like blackout situation, and I was on the floor, and the vet had his arms around me, and I'm like, I don't know, like it just keeps happening. And so I sought psychiatric care because I couldn't sleep. There were probably 6 weeks that I had nightmares every single night, the same recurring nightmare in the hospital. And I remember going to my GP and saying, I can't sleep and I am going crazy. I need help. And he gave me a week of sleeping pills and said, just be strong and get over it. And I think we get that so much. Just be strong and get over it. You can think your way out of this. Well, we really can't, particularly if it's gone way, way, way further back in the past than this situation, and we just don't realize it. So that was the point when I sought my psychiatrist, who thankfully still practices, and I've been with him I'm 45 now, so for quite a while. And he really kind of nailed down the issues that were going on, and kindly said, yeah, I think we have a can of worms that goes way back further that we're not going to open because you're dealing with a lot in your present, which I think is kind of antithetical to a lot of people who are like, let's go ahead and rebirth all of this trauma and live through it again. That's not always right for everybody. And I think that's, if I could say one thing to anybody going through trauma recovery, it is, please don't feel that if you have spotty memories or no memories of an event, that you need to force yourself to relive them, because not everybody does. Some people that works. Other people, it's much more distressing in the long run. So, but that's, anyway, that is the very long answer of how I got to where I first started consciously healing.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Thank you firstly so much for just sharing so openly. I'm just always in awe of the people who come on this podcast and the lives that people have lived and the wisdom that people have as they go through this process. So thank you very much. Um, it's it's so hard losing family members. It was the trigger of my grief as well and my depression. And it's such a challenging thing when everyone just wants you to be better. Everyone just wants you to be okay because you not being okay makes them not feel okay, and they don't want that. So it's a really hard thing for people to conceptualize, like how to actually deal with this and what should this look like and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And there's a lot of like metaphorical red tape around the grieving process, like 100%. And then having spoken to people in so many different countries across the world on the podcast, I'm no longer shocked when I hear that the medical system lets people down. Like it happens in every country, everywhere, to majority women across the
Yeah.
world, which is, it's a really, really sad place for us to be. But unfortunately, it is the way that it is. And it's something that I think a lot of women need to hear and understand, because when you go in and you're expecting to be treated well and fairly and equally and in a way that is helpful, and then you're not, it can, in that place where you're so distressed already, it can make you question even more so if there's actually something wrong with you and not wrong with the system. And I think that that is really, really important for people to hear. So thank you for bringing that up and actually sharing that as well. I think it's really important. So I always like to ask people, like, as you were going on this journey and you realized something had to change, what did you have to embrace about yourself or like accept about yourself in order to start this journey? Because it's not as easy as just being like, I'm going to heal and then just healing like we wish. But like, what had to change for you? What did you have to accept to actually go on this journey?
I think that what I had to accept, probably more than anything, was the fact that I needed help, which is a big first step for for a lot of people. I did resist it for quite a while. There were some behaviors in my teenage years that were probably teen appropriate, and then others that were maybe less so, and could have benefited from some kind of therapeutic intervention. But I really kind of dug my heels in, and my mom, she didn't think that there would be much to get out of just dragging a teen to go sit in a room, and probably not, you know, participating very much in it. And the whole act of it may have been more traumatic to the whole family than not. And really, it wasn't a situation where if there had been greater concern, she certainly would have. But I kind of just thought, I'm quirky and moody, and I'm a poet because I was. That's how I expressed myself. So I had to be a quirky, moody poet, and I drank whiskey all the time. And I had to, even as I was doing that, I was sitting outside under the trees, the glass of whiskey, and my leather-bound book, writing poetry, and thinking, someday I'm going to be the next Sylvia Plath, and this will be like how she had poured her trauma out in her words. And obviously, her story ended very sadly, but it'll be the same. All female poets have some tragic backstory, right? And that was kind of my mindset, was just that my behavior was kind of my cool identity or whatever, until I went through a period where it was like, oh, okay, this is what distress feels like. This is what panic attacks feel like. Am I dying every single night when I wake up like this? Or do I actually? And then I got to the point where I was like, I clearly can't self-soothe. And that should have been evident when I was drinking the whiskey outside. But it wasn't to me at the time. And I decided that rather than continue to go through that, I really needed to have help of somebody who could help me through it, and if medication was going to be involved, could help me through the process of being medicated to allow this distress to calm and therefore the healing to begin. So it really was in my mid-20s, and I had that series of just sort of like post-traumatic stress and this constant panic and severe insomnia and all these things that were leading to a real physical and mental decline, that I had to first accept, yeah, I need help. I can't do it on my own. There really wasn't the internet to turn to the way there is now. There are podcasts like this. It's so funny to be old enough to be able to say we didn't have that back then, but we didn't. So that was really kind of my thing, was just to finally go and see professional help, and that's where the journey started, and feeling very safe and facilitated and supported in doing it my own way, on my own terms, by my psychiatrist, was so important. And like you said, there's a lot of letdown in the healthcare community on all levels. And I just got lucky, really, as I got very lucky.
It's amazing. When you find somebody who can help you heal, like that it's such an incredible thing. There are
Mhm.
so many amazing people in the world who can help. Like it's not a dire, like you'll never find somebody. There definitely
Yeah.
are so many amazing people. I think that that's really important. Like, and I think as well, when you said about that, like regulating, a lot of people don't realize that when you are so dysregulated, you can't re-regulate yourself. Like actually, it's very, very difficult. You have to be very, very skilled to regulate yourself, even if you are very good at it. If something traumatic happens, you have to have something or someone that can actually regulate you back to a state where you can deal with. So a lot of people who go through trauma and they get this kind of like protection mechanism of I've got to deal with this myself,
Hmm.
you know, and especially like I see this especially in healers. So healers who help others, there's this kind of thing of like, well, I heal other people, so I should be able to do this myself. And this kind of disconnect there, I think it's so interesting. And so myself and a business partner, we run retreats together, women's retreats, and we will always end the day by grounding each other because it's
Yeah,
impossible when you're holding that much space for people to ground yourself. It just
exactly.
doesn't work. You just can't regulate when you've got that much going on. And it's one of the big things that I learned as I was going through my journey, that the moment I actually opened up and let other people help regulate me, it became so much easier to actually hold everything because
Mhm.
it wasn't always at that tipping point of
Right.
everything, falling apart. Rather it felt like, okay, well, this is a bit out of whack, but it's manageable, and like it wasn't as bad. Were there moments that you went through where you just thought like you couldn't do it, you couldn't make it, it was too hard?
Definitely. There definitely were. And that was kind of the first time in my life, actually, that I'd had any sort of depressed mood um, come into play. Um, and I definitely did have moments. Well, what I ended up doing shortly after entering into therapy with my psychiatrist is I decided that I was going to switch majors, because I had taken a couple-year break from college, where I was initially had gone in, actually initially pre-med was my application, and then I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I can do this much math. which sounds like a terrible reason to give up on a dream. But so I decided actually that I wanted to pursue psychology. So already being under the care of a psychiatrist, which is one of the things they recommend you do when you start a psychology degree, for that exact reason, because you start to self-diagnose and be unable to regulate, and just gets very concerning. So I decided to go for it, and my educational experience was actually great, and I was really focused. And I find that when I'm focused on something, I'm able to pour myself into that and not deal with the stuff that maybe needs to be dealt with. But I'm so focused on the task at hand that I can pour myself into that. And so I got that done very quickly in 2 years. And once that was done, it was like, okay, now what? Now I've got to get a job. And I'm also back to just not having anything to hyper focus on. So that is the first time really that I started having some hopeless, depressive moods, what actually would be considered clinical depressive moods, not just kind of a dysphoric or passing sadness, because that happens to all of us. But there were moments then in my mid-20s, and kind of into my later 20s, where I just felt completely hopeless, and that I'd lost track of any kind of forward momentum for myself in my life, as well as in my healing process. I was still seeing the psychiatrist, and he was still helping me. But what did help look like? What was the end goal? I hadn't defined that for myself at that point. So it's kind of hard to work towards it when your career is. That's when I was starting to gear up into my marketing career. But the job market crashed in 2008 when we had some issues. Yeah. So I had a lot of problems with employment then, after, I was in between jobs, and it was just like, this is it. I'm never going to figure out where I'm going. And that feeling of being lost, that was really tough to overcome. And I don't think I'm alone in that either. I get the sense from a lot of people that I've talked to that at some point or another, you hit that wall for whatever reason, and you just feel like you don't have a path.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that a lot from a lot of people, and the moment to that place is always a little bit different. So for some people, they did all the right things in inverted commas and still ended up in the wrong place. And they expected to tick all the boxes, and life, still wasn't good. And there's, yeah, a lot of people that I talk to have that same thing of like they feel like they've got it worked out, and then it just doesn't work, and it just isn't what they expect or how they wanted things to be. And I guess I'm always interested to understand, like, what was the shifting point for you? Like, what was the big, like, outlook change that got you moving forward, like made you realize, like, oh wow, we don't have to be here, we can be somewhere else?
For me, it's probably an interesting situation, because what actually ended up happening was that I put myself in a situation of even more trauma, probably the greatest and most acute trauma that I had, certainly as an adult. And that was a very troubled relationship. And again, not uncommon. I don't think that people who are recovering from certain types of trauma tend to walk back into those traps in very giant ways that we like to think that we know how to avoid, but we don't. And so really it went from this place of kind of feeling lost to feeling like, oh, I have this great relationship, and now I'm hyper focused again on something, right? Not listening to any of the quite obvious red flags that even other people were bringing up to me, because sometimes you just don't. You got to find out for yourself. And so that ended up being a situation where I was really back in financial, physical, emotional place of complete instability, and quite isolated. And what happened, the catalyst for change was that I had a child. And 6 months in, there was an event where the police basically said, "We're going to drive you to the airport if you would like to go home now." And I was like, "Okay, yes, we're going home." And so I did, and I've and relaunched my marketing career to more success than I had before. Was working hard as a single mom and juggling a lot, and that itself kind of made healing a priority, and also a little bit more difficult because I was so busy. So there was that kind of like catch 22, right? Because I had the reason, I had what I needed, because I needed to feel better for myself and for him, but at the same time finding the time to do that when I'm like working till 2 a.m. and then up with him with all of the baby stuff, was tough, but I stuck with it with my psychiatrist, who was also, again, very kind about things, and understands that it's not linear ever, and it's not a failure of his that I got into that relationship and got into trouble. I had to have that experience, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most important things for people to realize about healing is that it's not linear, is that it's not a neat little box where you go, oh, I'll deal with this thing and then it'll be done, and then I'll deal with this thing and it'll be done. Like, that's not how it works. And it is this process of figuring it out and doing it again and trying a different way and just navigating. It's messy. It's life. Like, that's what it is. That's how it is. It's just part of the process. I think, like, one of the big things that I always say about why I started the podcast was that exact, like, when I was going through my grief and going through my trauma and going through my healing and feeling really depressed, there was this constant, like, underlying message that you just need to get better quick, and you just need to deal with it really quickly and really efficiently and just not upset everyone around you. And it was just this constant, like, battle of, well, I need to force myself to try and feel better before I'm ready to feel better. And then obviously it just doesn't work. And then you just cycle back around, and normally it gets worse before it gets better. And there's all of these great things that happen as you go through the journey. So I think it's really great to just be able to talk about these things and have that kind of understanding of what goes on. Like, it's not an easy thing to run a business, never mind as a new mom, never mind while trying to heal. Like, there's so many layers of difficulty that a lot of people don't really appreciate, especially if they've never tried to do any one of those things.
Right.
Themselves as they've gone through life. So I think that that's really, really, it's really incredible. And I guess, like, how did you, like you said, the marketing agency was like very much what you did before, and you kind of stepped back into that and had more success, which was incredible. But you also said that you are a healer as well. Like, there is an element of healing. And, like, when did that come into the story? Like, how did that weave its way in, to get us to where we are now?
Yeah. So it was actually in 2007, right before 2008, when I kind of slid into this, the first depressive state, I guess. Um, I had started taking an interest in yoga and meditation and things like that, Reiki healing. And I incorporated them into my personal practice day to day, and felt so much better when I was doing them. Just not even just physically. I think that was my initial marker, was how can I exercise without hating it, and so I picked up practices that I thought would be good for my body, but they actually were good for my mind and spirit as well. And combining that with my psychology degree and doing some continuing education in psychology modalities that really resonated with me. I got my yoga instructor's license. So I went to school for that. I became certified in as a Reiki master teacher in 2 Reiki modalities. And I did quite a lot of work with that. I don't do so much of the energy healing anymore. It's something that I have the capacity to do, but I find that you really need to have a constant mindset that isn't always easy to maintain when the rest of life is super, super busy. And in the end, with my modality, it sort of aligned that something a little more practical and concrete was what was working for me and is what I teach others. The common thread through all of this for me has been and still is nature. And the times when I felt my best, and even when I was, you know, doing the poetry and the whiskey and stuff, like I mentioned, I was still outside in nature. And always was that thread that was the place that I felt best, or I felt most alive, or I felt, whatever positive stuff. Going for a walk, being in fresh air, being around the animals, and just always having a really special relationship with them and with nature. So for me, the healing, the surprise part of healing that I didn't really put together, that I was building this modality for wellness until later, was that when my grandfather died, he had just before his death purchased a really state-of-the-art, by 5 megapixels, state-of-the-art by that standard at that time, digital camera that he never got to use. So they bequeathed it to me, and spending as much time outside as I did, I was just, okay, I'm just going to start taking pictures of the things that I think are interesting in nature, which were the very close-up pictures of textures in nature and movement in nature and living systems and natural phenomena, and just sort of really found them to be inspiring and prompting me to think in a different way, to frame my life as part of nature. And what do I have in common with a tree? And what do I have in common with these things that I feel so safe around? And how can I bring that into my life in a way that, even if I can't be outside, like right now when it's 25-mile-an-hour winds and I don't feel like being in 18-degree cold in that, how can I still feel safe and grounded? And so that's how my modality, which is really a form of biomimicry, so just kind of copying nature, copying how nature looks, behaves, the structures, all sorts of things, literally just means mimicking nature. Combining it with wellness practices, meditation and journaling, somatic movement, somatic therapies in general, so good for trauma. As you know, if there's anything that anybody can pick up, if they're able to withstand touch or move, I totally always recommend adding a somatic element to something. So anything that involves feeling your body. And yeah, that's really just how I started to realize that I was healing in an organized way, and that I was having more beneficial effect, or was able to kind of organize healing thoughts in a clearer way with this system, and moving forward then as a healer. And that's not a word I really use for myself, so I kind of, like, I refer to it as sort of a guide, because I went back and got my certification as a holistic health practitioner, and that's sort of one of the first things they say is you're a guide to help people find wellness. And that resonated, because it's like, well, I don't want to heal people, but I do want to help them find something that works to heal. So yeah, that's like, went back to get certification in breathwork and journaling and various meditation modalities. I'm really big on learning, because it helps me to continue to teach people new things, as well as myself, and finding new things that work. So I'm an eternal learner, as I say.
Oh, I think that's incredible. It's such a good skill to have, to be able to continuously learn and to be continuously curious. The world is
Exactly.
forever changing, so it's so wonderful to be able to have that. And I know that you said that somatic practices is something that you really recommend to people. I do somatic therapy. I think it's the best thing in the world. I absolutely adore it. So I'm fully behind you on that one. But what other advice would you have for people who are, coming out of traumatic experiences, wanting to come into this healing space, wanting to, start this journey? What would you say would be a good place to get started?
I believe that one of the most important things that you can do, because, as you said earlier, a lot of us who have been through trauma and are looking to heal feel isolated. Um, and we really aren't, especially right now. I believe that everyone and everything, including the planet itself, is traumatized right now, is recovering, still reeling from lots of events and lots of things that are happening and continue to happen. And at the core, all of us are dealing with various types of wounds and things that need healing. Our communities, our governments, our businesses, again, our planet. Everything is in various stage of need right now,
Mhm.
which means that you're never really alone. And one of the best things that I can recommend to people is go outside, and it doesn't matter where you live, because there's always some way to find something, some little piece of nature that's really resilient. I love like pigeons in an urban setting because they have persevered, and everybody thinks they're annoying, but they have insisted that they are going to just where they were put, they are going to thrive. Weeds growing in the cracks of sidewalks, or if you're lucky enough, like me, to live in a place where you have trees and things you can go, grass under your feet, connect, because that is our home. It's what we're part of. We have grown very disconnected from nature, but we are natural beings. And that disconnect is a huge part of why depression is such an issue. Treatment resistant depression is such an issue. And people do have a lot of trouble healing from trauma, or people feel very anxious when our sympathetic nervous system gets stuck in fight or flight and we can't get ourselves out of it. Like you said, regulating, once you hit a point where everything is an emergency, there's no concept of rest. Nature doesn't know that. Even in a natural disaster, we had wildfires here that were absolutely heartbreaking. I know they have happened elsewhere in the world recently too, but that was so hard to go through, knowing it was happening here in my area of these places that I was kind of intimately connected to. But you look at the calm and the still afterwards, and you realize there's stuff pushing up through the ash, like there's still life under there. And there is innate healing. And we haven't gotten to the point where that's not going to happen yet. So find your community in the wild, I like to say, your wild community. Because if you don't feel comfortable opening up to other people yet, that's okay. Like that is a difficult thing to do. But there's no judgment from a tree. And hugging trees is one of my favorite things to do. And it is neurochemically, there's a proven give and take between plants and animals and trees and humans when we're exchanging energy. And it really does help. I know it sounds, hippy dippy and woo woo and all of that. And there's a lot of people who say that it's just silliness, but you hear time and again that, and this is especially true for men, that the outdoors is the place they go to get away. They go on their fishing trip, or they go camping and they feel renewed. There's a reason for that, for all of us, and that's because we're coming home and we're in our community. So that's my biggest piece of advice to people, is just don't be afraid to go be that person who gets fresh air and walks barefoot like me
Mhm.
the grass as often as I can, even when it's cold, and hugs a tree and talks to the birds. If somebody thinks you're crazy for doing it, okay, they're not there on their journey yet, but it's truly a place where you can be safe, because there is no judgment and there is nothing but space for healing. Nature's like the best at holding space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so yeah, it's so important. I grew up in South Africa, so we spent a lot of our time outdoors and a lot of time just in nature and just being
Mhm.
just being and just existing.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely lovely. And moving over and living in the UK was one of the hardest things that I did because it was just that kind of concrete jungle, like a very different environment that I was used to. And going through that process, and especially when I started to feel depressed and I started to really struggle, to not have those automatic regulators, available as easily as they were back home, it was a really interesting process to go through, to have to re-navigate actually how do I give myself those things and, create those same feelings. And it is like it's just chemicals in our brains. Like it is chemicals that we create when we are in the sun, our body creates chemicals. When we are out in nature, our body creates chemicals. Like when we hug, what regardless of what we're hugging, our body creates chemicals. It's one of
Exactly.
those amazing things that, the body just does. And I think it's so important for people to build up those chemicals, those positive vitamins, like all of those things that you get from being outside. I think that that is so important for people to do. A lot of people are dictated to by the weather and where they live and are very scared almost to go and just exist in the world, which I think is, something that's really, really important in that process. So
Yeah.
what what is your next level of healing? Where are you now, and what's to come for you?
Well, I'm still very much healing, and I don't think that if you've really been through traumatic events that you're ever cured. You can learn how to control your reactions to things. You can learn how to regulate your nervous system. There's always going to be opportunities for you to, let me rephrase that. There's always going to be a time where something will um, dredge up a feeling or something that you recognize, oh, this is a trigger response, or this is something that I can work on, or I love to say, frame it with curiosity.
Mm,
Okay, why did that happen? Let's
mm,
journal it. Let's note
mm,
it for now, because maybe I'm not ready to deal with it right now. But let's write that down, put a pen in it, and come back to it, because you're always going to have the opportunity for growth. That's an amazing thing about humans, is our potential for learning, growth, curiosity, healing never really ends. So for me, I recognize that I am a work in progress, and I'm really happy to be a work in progress, because how boring would it be if I hit the end game at 45? Like, what else would there be to do? So helping other people at this stage in my life is a huge part of my healing and where I want that to go. So I do have like a Substack where I do a newsletter and some podcast material, and I try to just make information and advice on my own story available to people if it's helpful to them. And as I said earlier, in my marketing career, I'm trying to gear that more towards helping make these endless array of messages that are coming at us every time we open our phone or turn on our television kinder and more conducive to some peace than this constant pressure to consume. And so for me, doing for others is also a huge part of healing, but so is still my next steps are continuing with my education. I'm enrolled in some more courses for some specific psychological modalities that are going to assist me, acceptance commitment therapy being one of them, which is really nice, for again for trauma, because there's a lot of mindfulness and being accepting that you're feeling something and not fighting it and not going, okay, I need to cure this right now. Um,
Mm.
and so things like that are a big part of my healing journey going forward, is really going to be, how can I take this stuff and start incorporating it into all the different aspects of my life, into my parenting style, into my relationship with my amazing boyfriend who's British. So he has I'm very familiar with that side of the world as well. And for nature, how can I give back to nature? I belong to, they have been periodically outside the window, so I'm glad that you can't hear them because they're noisy, but I belong to a family of crows that adopted me years ago, and have grown over time as they've multiplied. And we now have two ravens that they adopted, which is very unusual, who live here with us as well, and another species of crow. And so it's like I have a family outside as well, that that helps me heal, that makes me laugh, and that I accept, and I am looking forward to more time with them and more discoveries with them. I have a house plant. I consider the house plant part of my healing process. It's like I grow a medicinal garden outside, but this year was the first year that I brought one of the plants in and kept it over winter, and it's been like, me fussing over it like a newborn. But she's really going to be fine. She's a really healthy little strawberry, alpine strawberry plant. But it's little things like that, when I look at my healing journey, I have this broader goal of learning, helping others, contributing to the world, but I can't do that if I'm not also contributing those things to myself. So everything has that. My healing process going forward is recognizing that healing isn't done, and I can try all these different ways of increasing my I like to look at as growing like a personal grove, and each tree in that grove is some different method of feeling better or feeling regulated. And some things work and some things don't. That's okay. You put aside the ones that don't and you try something new. But that's working with others and working with myself in the process, in tandem, is hopefully where that's where I want to go. So hopefully that's where I'm headed.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, the process of healing, if you do decide to then help others, obviously in whatever way feels right for you. Obviously, so many people I speak to do this in so many different ways. But I always feel like when I speak to people and they've got this mindset of like their own learning, but also how they can have such a positive impact on the world, it's such a beautiful thing. Like, we need more people in the world who want to have a positive impact, who want to change the world around them, who want to look after nature, who want to look after the oceans, like who want to just be part of the world that we exist in now. And I think it's so incredible, like all of the people that I get to meet who are going on this journey, who are doing the things, who are fighting for like a better world that we get to live in. I think that that is just so special. And thank you so much for being part of that. I think that that is so wonderful.
Thank you.
It's been such an honor to talk to you. As always, we will put your Instagram below and people can reach out to you,
Absolutely.
and come and follow you and, come into your world a bit more, which will be incredible. But thank you so much for being part of the show, for sharing with us. It's been such an honor to have you as a guest.
Thank you. It has been an honor to speak to you, and thank you for what you are doing with this podcast and letting people share their stories and, find inspiration in what other people are doing, and recognize that we're kind of a community unto ourselves, because we all know what it's like to hurt. So I look forward to getting better with everybody.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to another inspiring episode of the Diary of Discovery. If you found value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends, family, or anyone else you think might benefit from the stories of hope and transformation. Your feedback means the absolute world to us, so please take a moment to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your reviews help us to reach even more listeners and continue to bring this meaningful content to the world. Until next time, remember, your healing journey is valid. You are never alone, and you have the strength to get through this. Keep shining bright, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Diary of Discovery.